Growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher. I've more or less been saying the same thing since I was around 3 years old. I'm not sure where the idea came from or why I even had it in the first place. It was just always something I had in the back of my mind when the Princess Ninja Muppet astronaut thing didn't really pan out. This little daydream was something made even more strange by the fact that I didn't really enjoy school, like, at all. You can ask my mom sometime because she loves to tell the story. But on the first day of kindergarten, I got so nervous I threw up on the teacher and had to go home, which now makes even less sense because from what I remember about my first classroom, it was pretty cool. We had a big plywood castle with actual towers we could play in, a jar full of tadpoles we studied, and even an incubator for eggs that we got to watch hatch into baby chickens at one point. Looking back, there were some parts about school I liked, but it was mostly more about stuff that we did than what I perceived as actual learning. That part I felt like I wasn't so good at from a pretty early age. The first time my teacher asked me to write a letter up on the board, it was an E. I remember being pretty confident that I was going to get this right since it was the first letter in my name after all, but when I got up there though, I wrote the E with too many lines, and the teacher took the time while I was still standing in front of the class to point out my mistake, which in my opinion wasn't the best way she could handle things. I remember my little bubble of confidence burst, and while I know from then on I probably wrote E's the right way, I obviously never forgot how sad the experience made me. That pretty much set the tone for how things would go for the rest of my elementary school career. None of my teachers were perfect, some of them were worse than others, and really, they were only human. There were still lots of experiences I loved, like doing our units on dinosaurs, outer space, medieval history, and music class, as well as field trips to the Toronto Zoo, the Biodome, and a local sugar shack, just to name a few. Still, I could never really shake the feeling that when I was in school, it felt more like I was there to follow the rules and show how good I could be than to actually learn how to do anything. I mean, yeah, I learned to read and write and count, but as a kid, I didn't understand how important these skills were, or that they would set the foundation for the rest of my learning basically forever. Nobody had really bothered to explain that to me in a language I could understand. I really just didn't want to get wrong answers because I wanted to make the adults in my life happy. Things kind of took a turn for the worse when I entered 5th grade. I don't really like to talk about it, but it was the year I went from being the weird, quiet kid who knew too much that nobody really bothered to the new class target. To date, being bullied was one of the worst experiences of my life, and it had a detrimental effect on the rest of my school experience. Because I felt unsafe in the classroom, I didn't want to answer questions or do my assignments. I almost had to repeat the year if it hadn't been for two amazing teachers who really stuck it out for me. Miss Sweet and Miss Jordan taught English and science, and I thought they were both amazing. They seemed to see me more than my regular teacher did, and they knew I was capable of being a good student if I just had a little bit of support. They're a part of the reason why I'm here in university today. I'm pretty sure if they hadn't worked together to make sure I pulled through, I probably would have been held back, and that would have changed my whole educational landscape. I owe them a lot as a student, and I hope that one day I get the chance to thank them properly. I'd like to say that things got easier for me after that, but unfortunately that whole experience was the cause and effect behind my social anxiety, which was pretty detrimental in terms of how I related to other kids my age. I ended up being on my own a lot of the time, but luckily as a way to cope, I threw myself into my interests, which included things like reading, writing, drawing, piano, choir, and video games. What I went through might have been a difficult experience, but taking the time to learn about what I loved, it taught me who I am as a person and helped impact some major choices later on in my life for the better. When I was 14, my family moved away from my childhood home and came to Nova Scotia. By that point, I had managed to form some stable friendships despite my inhibitions, so I took the transition kind of hard. I struggled with the Nova Scotia school system, and living in a small town, it was difficult because it was so different than what I had known so far. The school was lacking in resources and for teachers and classes. Core French wasn't taught past the 10th grade, and a lot of the time I had to take responsibility for my learning in order to get the knowledge I wanted. Eventually though, I made friends and even got involved in theater and improv through the school musical. Being in drama really helped my self-confidence overall, and helped me to feel like there was a place where all the things that normally made me weird were actually useful talents to have. This, coupled with my love of literature, was eventually what led me to Acadia, where I did my undergraduate degree in English and theater. So, what's to take away from all this? Well, for one thing, my life still isn't perfect. Mental illness is a struggle I face daily, sometimes with more success than others. In order to get where I am, it took a lot of me digging in my heels and saying, no, this isn't where I give up. and often sometimes just going out of the sheer desire to prove people wrong. Could you call it spiteful? Maybe a little, but in a way I have to thank the people who thought I couldn't do it the most, because they helped me as much with my success as those who supported me and taught me just as much too. Now more than ever, I want to be a teacher because I believe the next generation of students should be able to have improvements where grown-ups in my own life failed me. I want to have a classroom where students feel accepted and noticed, that they are valued for their differences instead of shunned for them, that everyone has something to contribute no matter how insignificant it may seem at the time. Above all else, I want my students to feel heard and safe. I want learning to be fun, something they look forward to doing. After all, these children are government mandated to attend an educational institution for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for the next 13 years of their life. Don't we at least owe it to them to make it kind of worth their while? When I think about what's really at the core of my teaching, I always kind of end up going back to the same thought. For those of you who have read Horton Hears a Who, the story will be familiar, but for those of you who haven't, it's basically about an elephant named Horton who hears a cry for help coming from a speck of dust on a clover. Because of his big ears, Horton is able to hear the Who's living on that speck and makes friends with them, despite the rest of the animals in the jungle treating him like he's crazy because they can't hear the Who's at all. I love this story because Horton uses his differences to help someone else, and stands by them even when it might put him in harm's way. We came to this classroom very different people, but with one thing in common, the love and desire to teach. Here at Acadia, we've created a bright and colorful place, and I know that we will create a bright and colorful future for our students. We've all worked so hard and we should be proud of ourselves. I know everyone is going to do amazing, but in case there are hard days, I just want to leave you with one last thought, brought to you by Horton. Don't give up, I believe in you all. A person's a person, no matter how small.